HR leaders, what's on your mind these days? Is it AI? Is it the economy? The talent market? Remote work? Retention? DEI? Pay transparency? New laws? Our 2024 Workplace Trends Report outlines how HR leaders are thinking about these challenges and what they believe will help their organizations overcome them. Want to find out what they said? Head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/Workplace Trends 2024 and download the report to find out.
I think a big part of leadership, though, is really understanding your people. One is understanding that you can generate a tremendous amount of work, but also understanding what are the challenges, what's going on in people's lives, what's important to them, and then figuring out how you make an environment that's supportive of all of those attributes.
Welcome to the People Managing People podcast. We're on a mission to build a better world of work and to help you build happy, healthy, and productive workplaces. I'm your host, Tim Reitsma, and today I'm joined by Darren Person, a tech exec with over 20 years experience, who is currently the CIO at NPD Technology Group, a leading company that addresses clients' needs through innovations in data and analytics. So in our conversation today, Darren and I talk about the importance of a data-driven culture and how we should approach creating this culture. And guess what? It starts with us, the leaders, creating a culture of safety, innovation, and trust. It's not necessarily about creating spreadsheets and formulas. Sure, that's part of it, but it's really building the systems that allow our people to know what matters, what metrics make sense, and how to have fun along the way. So stay tuned. Darren, so good to have you on the People Managing People podcast. I'm excited for our conversation today. We're going to be diving into that question about data-driven decision-making. And I know for some that's maybe not a fun topic or an easy topic, but man, it is such an important conversation, especially when we think about our businesses, building a better world of work. And so I'm excited to dive in. So welcome. Thanks for coming on. And before we get into it, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you're up to? What keeps you busy these days?
First off, thank you very much, Tim, for having me on. It's great to be here with you and your listeners. So thank you again. So let me tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Darren Person, the CIO for a company called the NPD Group. We're a market research company. So we really specialize in bringing the world's point of sale data together, and really with the goal of helping retailers and manufacturers make better decisions, both around how they should price and promote their products, as well as what types of products and features they should bring into those products. So that's a little bit about me really quickly. So yeah, it's really good to be here.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating role that you play. And when we were, connecting at a pre-call about your role in NPD Group and how you collect data to make better decisions or help organizations make better decisions. And before we just dive into that, I always ask my guests a couple leading questions, a couple standard questions, just because I'm a curious guy and I'm kind of doing my own research, if you will. And I love asking people this first question: what does it mean to be a leader?
Yeah, look, I think, when you think about leadership, I think this is always an important topic around, what is a leader? What are the attributes, the features of a leader? I think first and foremost for leadership, it's really about understanding and engaging with your teams and understanding the needs that everyone in your organization has is different, right? In each and every way. What drives and motivates one person is different than what drives and motivates another person. The one thing I tell you that I always try to bring to light is the reality as you move up in an organization. An old boss once said to me that, as you move up in the organization, it's almost like having a bullhorn, right? Every word you say is amplified 1,000 times for every level you move up. At the CEO level, it's amazing that the slightest whim, right, of a word can actually generate a tremendous amount of activity in a business. So I think part of being a leader is also realizing that you have a lot more weight when you say things, and to be mindful of what you say, because you can drive a tremendous amount of work into an organization without ever really having imagined that you were doing that. So I think a big part of leadership, though, is really understanding your people. One is understanding that you can generate a tremendous amount of work, but also understanding what are the challenges, what's going on in people's lives, what's important to them, and then figuring out how you make an environment that's supportive of all of those attributes.
Yeah, it's what I'm hearing is creating that inclusive culture, that inclusive space, because you're absolutely right. Our organizations are made up of individuals, are unique individuals, and we all have different needs. We all have different aspirations. And so what I'm hearing is a key part of being a leader is really that understanding where people are at, what do people need, and how to create that environment for people to thrive. Because if people are thriving, our businesses thrive. It's not as simple as that, but yeah.
No, I agree. And look, one of the things I think that the pandemic, as awful as it's been, has done for organizations is it's given us a little bit of a window into just how important connecting with people really is to your overall ecosystem. So, for example, like one of the things that I did during the pandemic, which I created this "What's on Your Mind" session. And what I usually start the session telling people is, look, as the CIO of the company, I'm privileged and honored to kind of have a variety of ways to communicate to everyone. My town halls, the emails that I send out, I get to communicate to the organization at abroad, the things that are on my mind. And what I really want to do is create an opportunity for people to share with me what's on their minds. So every week, I assemble a small group, 6 to 7 people. It's designed to be cross-functional. So there's people from different parts of the organization so that they can each hear what's going on in their own worlds together, what's on other people's minds. Sometimes there's very similar. Sometimes it gives other people an appreciation for other parts of the business that they may never have had before. And the feedback that I've gotten from the team has really been phenomenal around how much they appreciate the program and how much it's helped them. It also gives them a window to realize that in addition to being the CIO, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a dog lover, things like that, like a little, maybe kind of making me a little bit more real than just always being some couple of words on a diagram somewhere, or just everyone looking up to some kind of super uber leader model.
Oh, I love that. It's creating that safe space, that trust, cross-functional teams, two-way communication. If that is the one takeaway somebody's listening to this podcast is, I know that's not what we're going to be talking about, but man, that is such a phenomenal thing that you've implemented, you've done, you've taken the initiative, and yeah, it just builds the culture and adds to the culture of the organization.
Yeah, it does. The other thing, Tim, which maybe you'll find interesting, right? So part of leadership is two things, right? It's kind of your inside out and your outside in kind of perspective. In a lot of ways, leaders think about the leadership that they can drive, meaning, am I a good manager? Am I setting the vision, the strategy for the organization? Am I mobilizing things? The other parts is trying to figure out for everyone's role, including someone like a CIO who traditionally is inward facing kind of a role. How do you actually become a closer business partner and more aligned with the support and direction that your organization is going? Is there a way for you to help your business leaders be more successful in the organization? So while I created the What's on Your Mind session internally, I also created a CIO outreach program with other clients that we had. And really this was in thinking about, technology being this agnostic kind of area that, we can always talk about no matter whether we're competitive or not competitive. Like there's nothing competitive about whether your Windows machine works or doesn't work, right? Like those are always discussions that we can have as CIOs. So I created this CIO outreach program really to enable discussions between other CIOs. Now they tend to be our clients at NPD because it's easy, right? I have access into those companies to go and make those conversations and connections. But by doing that, it's also then helped me have a stronger seat as a leader in the company because I can actually share back what are the problems that I'm hearing that our clients are having. And I can bring that back as part of the leadership team. So again, leadership not just being top down in an organization, but also being thought about more holistically around how can I be a better CIO for the company and a better partner for all my other business partners as well.
I love that. I love what you said. Just the outside in, inside out, and sharing that with your outward community as well, and building that connection. I mean, not only is it good for business, but it's also good for your clients, as well as creating that safe space, that common area for people to come to and to connect. So that's awesome. I think we could probably spin up a whole conversation just on that because it leads into my next question, which is, again, our purpose here at People Managing People is we want to help you build a better world of work. And we'd love to hear from you. When you hear that phrase, what comes to mind? What kind of rings in your ears when you hear that?
Yeah, well, look, a number of things. I think the best way to think of it is really around like how do we help each other at the end of the day, right? When you think about building a better world of work, you know, we we live to work, we don't work to live, right? So did I say that wrong? Maybe it's the other way around. Either way, you get the general idea. Like
Mm-hmm.
the goal I think for all of us is that, a big part of where we spend our time is the daily work environment. And in order to do that, we kind of create these pseudo families inside that environment, and also these networks of people that we collaborate with and we learn from and we share with. So when you think about like how you build a better world of work, it's your ability to tap into all of the resources that come with you as an individual. So, when I joined NPD, one of the things that, I had shared is, hey, you don't just get me and my direct experience, but you also get my network, the collection of people that I've built over the years who I can go to when I'm struggling with something or I have an issue or a challenge. It's really this network of people that I can reach out to who are also experienced in 1,000 other things and can give direction. So when I think of that larger concept of building a better world of work, it's really how do we leverage both the assets that we have internally and then our entire network to really figure out what the best model, and how do we help each other be more efficient, better at what we do, take stress out of what we do, right? Probably the most stressful part of a job is when you get pointed up against a situation that you've never been in before and you don't know what to do. And the release trigger is having someone who has done it and been there before who can come in and help guide you through it, even though there's slight nuances in all of that stuff. So taking anxiety out of the work environment, all of those kinds of things really help build what I think would be this better world of work.
Yeah, it's that support network. And, it kind of leads almost into our conversation about data-driven decisions is building that support network, supporting each other as human beings. And I love that comment you made about stress, right? Being able to support each other and saying, but also having that trusting environment where it's like, hey, I've never done this before. I want to do it. I need to figure it out, and not be ostracized or punished because you don't know how to do it. But in the flip side of that is creating that space where, hey, I don't know how to do this. And I can imagine if somebody came to you, Darren, in the organization, you'd roll up your sleeves and go like, all right, let's figure it out. I'm going to coach you through this. I'm going to walk you through this. And so the next time it comes up, you're going to know how to do it. So that's awesome. And so just to kind of flip that a little bit into what we're talking about today and about making data-driven decisions. And when we think about data-driven decisions, I think, at least for me, there's kind of the two sides of it. One is we don't need data. My gut tells me everything. I'm good. The other side is data only. We need to be making those data-driven decisions. So when we think of that, how does that support building a better world of work through that sense of the data-driven framework or data-driven decision-making?
Yeah, I think the first thing to think about is data is like a guide more so than anything else. Right? It's there to inform what decisions we make and also to be able to help explain why we made them. So, when you think about things like I don't know, take any topic, but take a topic that would probably be near and dear to some of our clients. So, what features should I build into the next TV that I'm going to make, right? You could certainly just go and try to wing it. Be like, I feel like HDMI ports are really important to my clients, right? And that's what I'm going to go do. Or you could really take a look at the history of what's recently sold. Now, remember, what's recently sold isn't a predictor of what will sell in the future. But what you can do, and this is kind of almost like reverse engineering what would be like a conjoint analysis, right? Where you kind of go and you show someone a product and you change the features and change the price points. And based on what they select, it starts to show you their propensity and interest. They're willing to pay more money if the product had this feature. Well, we collect the world's point of sale data. So we actually have the answers to those questions. What did people actually buy? And then when you look at all of the features of what they bought, let's take a TV as just a really simple example, right? The LED versus LCD versus the different screen types, HDMI ports. what you can then see in the data is these patterns that, oh, okay, based on this range of product, people really chose the HDMI ports, or they chose LED versus LCD or QLED. Like, you could see what people were opting for. So now that helps inform your decision. Doesn't necessarily mean your decision is going to be the right one, but certainly you're in a better position to make that decision, plus applying some of your learned experience and maybe even some conversations you're having with customers that are more gut feel to extend that out a bit further. So the way I kind of think about data is really as a guide for most people to help them make informed decisions. It's certainly not the answer. And, I think, look, over time, machine learning will get better and get better. But, until someone can predict the stock market, because we have tons of data of trends in the stock market, we still can't predict, what's going to happen tomorrow. I think the reality is there's always going to be a little bit of decisions, but certainly we have portfolios from the stock side that's based on historical understanding, and we feel that that'll give us our best returns in the long term. So both of those models, the stock example and the TV example, are just different ways to think about how data can be applied to help us make some better decisions.
Yeah, and I think that example is true across all types of businesses. We're in the digital publication space, so we make bets on what type of content our audience is going to appreciate, is going to read. How's that play into a monetization strategy? You could be doing that when you're building high-tech product, or like an appliance or a household item like a TV. So there's companies that collect so much data and then get almost paralyzed by that data. But there's also companies who just go off gut feel. I worked for a company who made a decision purely on gut feel, and we ended up throwing out thousands of products and multi-million dollars of investment just gone because we thought we could play in a space that we just didn't understand. So we don't want to be paralyzed because we have too much data, but we also don't want to be paralyzed because we don't have enough data. So I'm just curious about an example, if you have an example of a company who's done it well or who is doing it well, using data to drive that decision to push their organization forward. But also on the flip side, have you seen some terrible examples?
Yeah, look, I think, I have to tell you, this is a muscle that a lot of companies have been getting better at doing. So a lot of manufacturing companies, a lot of retail companies, to your point, publishing companies. I'm not sure there's an industry today where the muscles aren't getting stronger. I think maybe the big question is whether or not they're picking and choosing the right metrics to guide them, right? Which data points that they should really be looking at? What are the most important data points specific to their business? And obviously what's going on in the larger environmental situation that we've got now, right? So if you think about it, we kind of had the pandemic. That was a big pivot and change in the way we operated. Now you've got coming a bit out of the pandemic, right? We can't say we're fully out of it, but we're slowly coming out of it. And then you've got yet another hiccup with the Great Resignation kind of ecosystem that's going on out there. So a lot of these economic plays that are going on also weigh into the larger question. But I think at the foundations is really around how these companies specifically drive some of that decision making and which metric they need to look at given that current environment. So, before the pandemic, you may have only been looking at, top line revenue growth, right? Because companies were doing really well. The cost of producing things was really cheap. Now that we're slightly in this recessionary potential kind of period, maybe it's not about just pure top line revenue growth. Maybe it's actually about how you optimize your margins and get better returns, your profits, your EBITDA kind of statements. I think to that point, right, I think a lot of companies are collecting data. It's really about picking the right metric for that business. And that's going to be a different metric per company and what the business is that company is in. And I think a lot of companies are strengthening this muscle and they're getting better and better at it over time. I don't know anybody that's doing it tremendously poorly. I think most of those companies are probably either going out of business or not around anymore, just given the amount of data and how other people are doing it and have seen it more of a strategic advantage to using data to help make them make decisions.
Yeah, it's there's more and more companies who are leveraging metrics in their data. And, the big question that always pops in my mind, or even from small companies, is, well, what metrics matter? So, well, what metrics matter to your business? if you're in a for-profit business, well, I think, profit margin and everything you said, you need revenue. If you're a nonprofit, maybe you still need money. So maybe it's a slightly different metric. Or, we're in the publication space. So there's more to it than just looking at revenue or the number of pieces of content that go out. And so when we think about like that data-driven decision, and we sort of alluded to this earlier, there's this idea of gut feel that goes into it. And so we know that, we said earlier on, data is the guide, but sometimes we just need to make that decision and own that decision. And that's, I think, scary for some people. So how do you balance that? Like in your role as a CIO, right? You're collecting all this point of sale data and you're looking at something. How do you then go, okay, well, the data is saying X, but I think it's Y. Do you ever have that internal battle yourself?
Oh yeah. I mean, we deal with it all the time. It's a little bit around like, how do we think about the new capabilities, something new that no one's ever thought of, right? If you think about Apple as a great example as a company, there's no data that there was no data that led them directly to the notion of the iPod, right? There was data that people wanted to listen to music. There was data of how much music people were listening to. And there were some early ideas about, what are better ways to organize that content and how to deliver it to people, right? We had Walkmans, right? We were able to do it, but it required a little bit of leap of faith and this general, notion that Steve Jobs had at the time to think outside the box. Now, the iPod was an amazing boom, but it also could have went a different way if the customers, the client, the people, the consumers of that product weren't willing to adapt to it, weren't ready for it, right? So a bit of, that kind of decision making it's understanding your customer, it's understanding when's the right time to introduce something that's game changing. And I think that does require a bit of that gut instinct as part of that. I don't know how much the data can tell you that, besides the criticality of going and meeting with clients and going to speak to people and learn about what their challenges are. And then doing what you do best, right? You take all of your experience and you say, okay, here's what I've heard. And what do I think is a way I can do something completely differently? And again, that's all grounded still in, all of the things that got you there. But I think the differentiation comes as that last mile of change and differentiation that you bring to the table.
Yeah, I saw this somewhere on social media in the last day or so of this image of a bicycle, and it's completely deformed, and the caption was something about companies trying to solve problems that don't exist. And so it's almost like taking the opposite approach of like purely my gut feel, this is going to be a problem in 2 years, so I'm just going to build something without actually understanding what's the problem we're trying to solve. And I think I also heard somebody recently say, customers buy products to solve problems. Back to your TV example, if you only have one HDMI port, but you've got 13 devices, is that going to actually meet that customer demand? And so it's really that, I think you're right, that balanced approach to it.
I also think, Tim, building on that a little bit as well, which is, look, you need space to try new things, right? There's going to be new technology, there's going to be new capabilities, new ideas. So I think, again, thinking about building a TV, I don't think anyone goes, should the TV be in color or not anymore, right? Eventually data becomes fairly standard, right? It's okay, it's definitely going to be a color TV. Okay, it's definitely going to be, 65-inch, right? Whatever. Some of those things are like table stakes now. Now, at one point they weren't, right? Well, would people really want color versus not color? Like those were actual questions. I think now you've gotten to that point. Now you've got other questions. So for example, a smart TV, right? Will people want to use a smart TV, or will they feel more comfortable with a Chrome device or a Fire TV or an Apple TV kind of a device? So I think those are the opportunities. Like, well, what happens when we integrate that into the television set? Like, is that something a customer or a client would really be interested in using? And would they use it more so that way? And data is not going to tell you that, because there's going to be no data points to get you there. That's your leap of faith. That's your instinct. And then you try it. And now you use that as your data point. So I think also just companies creating the space to try, knowing that some of these things are going to fail, and even data-driven things are going to fail at some point, right? Or it's just not a perfect science. And I think just being open to that and creating space for that to happen is a huge win. And that kind of ties back into the leadership conversation we started with.
I'm glad you made that connect, because I was going to make that connection too. I think we just went full circle, which is cool. You've got all this data. You think you know the path, but if you don't have that psychological safety, that culture of experimentation, that culture of trust of, hey, we're just going to give things a try and see what happens. Obviously, things are going to fail, and that's okay. So, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, is that question of how do we then, take all these inputs that we've gathered, and how do we then create a safe space or a culture of trying, a space, as you said, the space we need in order to innovate, in order to grow our organizations or our products or whatever that looks like?
It's a really good question. And look, every company is tackling this, a little bit differently. So I think for me, what's worked really well is when we create projects, there's two ways to create projects. There's, you can set the expectation that you know all the answers and I need X dollars and you'll get Y return back. And hey, yeah, there's a bunch of risk, but here's the big project. The other way, which is the way I kind of prefer, is what I would take as a more iterative. Some people will call it agile. I don't think it's pure agile, but it's a more iterative approach. It's how much do you need to spend to know whether or not your hypothesis is correct. So we all start with a hypothesis. And then the question really is, okay, now that I have this idea, at this point, day zero, I just have an idea. There's 100% risk in that, right? I don't know if it's going to be successful. The only way I know is I have to do something to start to de-risk that project. So if you can quantify, let's say a step one, I need to spend, I don't know, let's say $100 to figure out whether or not this idea or this hypothesis makes sense, then that is a way to present projects and ideas to the business in a way that will, first off, is tangible, right? You get everyone to buy into the hypothesis, but to evaluate that, you're not asking for some major amount of investment, some multi-year kind of project that may or may not succeed, but rather continuous innovation, continuous learning, and then you create these release levers, right? At some point, after spending the $100, if the project doesn't seem like it's going to make sense or it introduced a whole bunch of new risks, you now have a place where you haven't spent that much money and you can pull the trigger and say, okay, we're going to stop. Maybe we'll switch to a different hypothesis altogether. And I think a lot of places where people get stuck is they make that upfront commitment to deliver something, and then they start to panic because maybe their hypothesis was slightly wrong and maybe they should have asked a different question, but they already presented this big idea. And now they're stuck and they've got to figure out how to deliver against that idea. And that, I think, is what typically creates that cycle that you see or that we're not seeing enough of, right? Is that ability to kind of have a free space and a safe space to fail. You need to create smaller iterations so you can fail fast and fail cheap versus fail big and take a long time to do it.
I'm rapidly scribbling notes because, when we're going to be releasing this in the next 6 weeks or so, but this is top of mind for me as we're looking to build out a product and we're going down that path, and it's a significant investment. And I had a big conversation today, not when people are listening to it, but when we recorded this, as to how do we de-risk this? It's a big investment. I believe in it. Person who's going to help create it, we believe in this. But is it what the world needs right now? Is it what people are seeking? And so how I love that. You want to fail fast, fail small versus throw everything out there. But it's creating that culture of innovation. And one of our early episodes, we had John Carter on. He was co-founder of the Bose noise canceling headphones, and he had talked about this culture of innovation. You gather the data, you gather the information, and you experiment. And instead of looking for, the failures in it, but what did you learn out of that process? And yes, there's cost to that, obviously. But I love that $100 versus $100,000. That's a big, big difference.
It is. And by the way, like, there are great stories out there. And I would highly recommend people look up some of the stories of companies that were built on the back of this. Like Zappos is a great story to read about how Zappos was built. I think the first instance of Zappos.com, if I remember the story correctly, it was like a website, but there was no e-commerce engine. When an order came in, someone on the back end would literally run around and go to stores to buy the shoes to fulfill the orders, right? And that was them trying to understand and figure out, well, would people even be willing to buy shoes online at this point, and what would they need to do in order to make people feel comfortable with buying shoes? There's a couple of great ones. I'll see if I can find the article on it that talks about the history. But I just think you can get motivation and insights and inspiration. And when you're pitching your ideas, like, talk about what other companies have done. Talk about big names who have actually started this way to support your idea and show how this is your hypothesis and how you want to start off small and how you're going to iterate to figure out whether or not it's going to get there. I feel like that really does help, so that first off, it doesn't seem like it's some unique idea that's never been tried, because a lot of it isn't, right? We're just iterating on what other people have already done, even though we're changing the industry maybe which we're doing it in.
Yeah, and so even right back to our topic of data-driven decision making across organization, the importance of it, but coupling that with what we're just talking about is that culture change, that from the top down, that leadership, is a person like yourself sitting in your position is creating that safe space for your team to thrive and experiment. And that, the word that comes to mind is fun. Now it turns into it's fun rather than, oh, what if I get it wrong? And I'm curious, how do you weave this into your team and your organization?
So, the easiest way I can think is, I think you start with outcomes, right? I think a lot of projects tend to start with, like, here's what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. I think that sets you off on the wrong track. I think you have to set the goal of what you want the outcome of your effort to be. And then you've got to empower the teams to try things out, to figure out what the right tools, technologies are, and then even to innovate, maybe even to come back to you with, hey, I know you said we should do this, but this could be a really cool way, and it's a bit of a pivot off of what you were thinking. So it's getting that collective mindset going. But I think if you lead with more of the outcome of what you want to achieve, and you let people innovate on that outcome, that's the power of leveraging. And I bring you back to the leadership topic, right? That's the power of leadership, because everyone wants to know what the goal is. Not everyone wants to be told how to get to that goal, because each of us is different. We all have ideas and we have different points of view on how we can get somewhere. And it also kind of breaks apart that group think problem that a lot of companies run into. So I think that's a big key is focus on the outcome, let the teams focus and think through the how, and that'll hopefully help you guide towards where you want to get to.
I love that. It's as we're looking to wrap up the conversation, I think that sums it up so nicely. Because anybody who's leading a team or, as an individual contributor or sitting at the C-suite in an organization, as they're listening to this podcast and thinking about data-driven decision-making, it's not just as simple as, okay, we just need to hammer out our metrics, collect the data, and that's just going to inform the decision where we're going to go. It's more than that. And it's about the culture. It's about how you lead. It's about creating that space to utilize that data in a way that then drives the business forward. And it's, again, the theme that I think I'm picking up on, Darren, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is really that environment is so key. The data obviously is key. We need to have good data to make good decisions. But setting up that culture within your team, within your organization to thrive, not fear, is crucial.
No, it's exactly right, Tim, because it's really important. And I know it maybe sounds like a cliche because people say it, but our people are our biggest and our most important asset. No matter what we do, I'll joke with my team. I'll always tell them I stand on the shoulders of giants. But the reality is I don't do stuff myself, right? I cannot deploy technology on my own in an organization. I cannot, write all the code by myself in a company. In fact, I don't write any code. I haven't written code in the organization in a while. And of the code that I do write, not many of my engineers want to put that into production anymore. Because the reality is we hire people now who are even better than we are. Our job is to facilitate putting together the best of the best in a team that can be successful. And when I was in college, I rowed crew. And for those that don't know, right, crew, we rowed in what were called eights. It was an 8-person boat. One of the things that I was fascinated about was you could put those 8 people in a boat, but if you put them in the wrong configuration, the boat will clunk along and won't go very fast on the water, which ultimately is the outcome, the goal of why you're putting people in the boat. You want the boat to go as fast as possible. But then you find the order in which to put people in the boat that it goes its fastest. And you find that each seat has its special attribute, if you will, whether you're a lefty or a righty, whether you're comfortable here or there. But when you put people in that right combination, the boat goes almost as fast as it looks like it's just skimming the water. And I think that's our job as leaders, is to figure out what's the right combination of people to put in the boat. And then even once we put them in the boat, what's the right placement for those people so that that boat can go as fast as possible? And that's my best metaphor I can give you on how I think about leadership in an organization. And also, even if you have the right people, if you put them in the wrong positions, you're not going to be very successful. You really have to figure out the balance of both.
I love that metaphor. Thank you for sharing that. There's so much wisdom just packed into that last little bit, Darren. And as those who are listening, where do we start? What's the one thing we can do today to start? Because it's like, okay, do I have to start collecting data, and how do I do that? How do I come up with metrics? How do I build this culture? Like, what's the first step that somebody can do today to work towards creating that safe space to become that data-driven organization?
Yeah, I think there's two things. So on the leadership side, there's nothing stopping you from becoming your own leader, right? I do it from the CIO position, but there's nothing stopping people from getting together, getting colleagues together, creating their own what's on your mind sessions. I'm just a facilitator in those meetings at that point. The meetings kind of take on their own world. And especially in this remote work environment, one thing I'll always hear from teams is, oh, well, we don't really have the water cooler, anymore to kind of go chat about. Well, you don't have the physical water cooler anymore, but there's nothing stopping you from creating a virtual water cooler, right? And I think just that general notion of stop looking up for some guidance and figure out how you can look at yourself and how you can become a leader in helping drive some of those important attributes. Like, how do I help build a community of people? So on the leadership side, I think, take that drive, take that initiative. Don't look up all the time, waiting for something to be bestowed upon you. Take the onus and attribute of it. On the data-driven side of the organization, look, what metrics drive most companies. I think one thing you can do is chat, see if you can speak with someone on your board, talk to your CEO, talk to your leadership team, understand what metrics they perceive to help drive the company forward, and then use that to help inform what are the things that your teams need to do to support that. Because again, coming back to the pandemic, one of the things that became really clear in the pandemic was when all the other chips were down, focus was the guiding light for everyone. And what the pandemic created is it forced us to focus on what was most important, both, and let's put it honest, right? Both professionally and personally, right? A lot of people found a new appreciation for family time and quality of life, which is great personally. And businesses found a new focus, right? It was, look at all these thousands of things that we're doing. Well, we've got to stay solvent. Let's put all those things to the side. Let's focus on what are the key things we need to do to be successful and keep the business running. And those companies actually turned out doing better in the long run than the ones that continue to just keep doing what they were doing. So I think learning the key metrics that are important to an organization, and then how do you create that singular focus for your organization that's going to help you be successful in driving those metrics up is going to be key to being successful.
I love that. Focus. That's a word that I'm going to embody over the next couple of weeks, is that, there's 100 things you can work on every single day, every single week. But what is that? What are the 1, 2, or 3 things that are going to drive your business forward? And how do you then empower your teams to also drive that business forward? Darren, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I have so much to take away from this and some learnings that I need to apply into even my business. So thank you for coming on and even helping me. And I appreciate you coming on today.
No, thank you, Tim. And again, thank you for having me on, and what a great discussion. Really appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks. And for those who are listening, we'd always love your feedback. So head to our LinkedIn page or our website and drop me a note. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this episode. And as always, please like and subscribe to the podcast. And with that, I hope everyone has a terrific day.